So we've been making YouTube videos around here for almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years next year. And I thought when this started out it was going to be a blacksmithing channel, and then it morphed to where it was going to be a carpentry and construction channel, and then there began to be a subtext, a sub-theme of communicating ideas and ways of thinking about life, and ways that young men specifically can sort of launch themselves in a direction that would be maybe somewhere near ideal, communicated through speech. And so as it turns out, I do a lot of talking. And for those of you that don't like that, I'm sorry, I apologize. But there are some things that have developed for us and for me that I think are important enough to use this space to do it. And one of them is to identify what it is in my upbringing that taught me how to talk, communicate. Because communication is the elephant in every single living room. Either effective communication or lousy communication accounts for most of human thriving and pretty much all of human suffering, right? I mean, the ability and willingness to communicate. And it always seems to be, effective communication always seems to, at least in the main, be reducible to confidence and conviction, to passion and enthusiasm in communicating an idea, even if the idea is subtle and not easy to communicate. So let me go through a list of, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10 things that bear on communication, at least as I think about it. And the first one has very little to do with the words that come out of your mouth specifically, but it has everything to do with being aware of and acknowledging the other person. So I've gotten in the habit of talking to this camera, but as I do this, I'm thinking about those of you who comment and those of you who come with questions and answers and suggestions and little thumbnail sketches of your lives and your successes and your failures, and I'm visualizing who I'm talking to. Several hundred of you have stopped by the shop, and it's been my blessing to become acquainted, and I'm visualizing you. It's a thing to be able to acknowledge the person that you're communicating with. And acknowledging is not just, tipping your hat, waving your hand, saying, "Hi, how are you?" Acknowledging is finding ways to help them understand that you either have or want to have a pretty significant understanding of who they are and what makes them tick. So in this arbitrary list of things that seems important, how about if every time you are engaging in social interaction, social intercourse, communication, you come first with the notion that, look, I need to be a student in this moment and understand who I'm speaking to, understand their age, their worldview, what you have at your disposal about what you have at your disposal about their confirmation bias, what they assume to be true in every case. And with that information in the front of your brain, the way that you interact with them is not only going to be more satisfying for them, but it's going to be satisfying for you because you're going to understand more about the questions you can ask and more about what part of your answers they can receive. Not only that, but if you're paying close attention to the markers they throw down of tone inflection and body language and when they're leaning forward and when they're pushing back, you're going to have a good idea of what subjects are just not that welcome and probably should be avoided maybe until another time. So come to the conversation not just as a teacher, but as a student. So another aspect to this being a student is when you run into someone who is a master communicator, everything within you should be absorbing everything you can get from them about how are they doing this so effectively. File it away. Begin to experiment with what the things are that you identified that they do. And on the other hand, flip the script. If you talk to somebody for, 45 seconds and you realize, wow, I need to take a nap, or I need to do anything other than spending my time trying to communicate with this person, remain a student and say, what is it in the way that person approaches this interaction that is so off-putting, frankly boring, frankly a waste of my time? Make a list of those things and wipe those out of your behavior. Okay, all of these are related, and this one is very closely related to the last one of being a student. But you've all heard people say that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, which means we should listen exactly twice as much as we speak. Yes, at least that. But there's more than just one way to listen. It is as important to learn to listen to what someone is not saying, perhaps, as it is to listen to what they are saying. I mean, it's that in reading. It's reading in the good books. You can read between the lines in letters, in emails, in Scripture. And so practice that in communication, listening, not just to what is said, but what is not said. And if you can develop the art of listening to what is not said, maybe you can think of that as listening to their heart, listening to that which they were not able to articulate for some combination of reasons. But in general, a good conversation is one in which each of you spend more than half the time listening to the other person. Perhaps you have listened to people speak without any tone inflection, perhaps in church, and after about 30 seconds of that, you're sound asleep. A monotone, what good is a monotone? I mean, I cannot think of a case where the spoken word, by the way, I highly recommend Tom Wolfe's book, The Kingdom of Speech. That will give you things to think about that you haven't thought about before. But Mr. Wolfe aside, it was the last book he wrote actually, and way out of character, but that aside, can you think of anyone that communicates effectively that does not use the range of tone inflection and expression and enthusiasm, or who can't inflect dread into what it is that they're saying in an unaffected way, in a natural way? This is something, in much the same way that you can find a trusted mentor and say to them, can you point out to me any areas where I'm really stepping on my tail? Maybe you're a young man or a young woman and you're trying to develop habits for success and you want someone to advise you. Go to someone and say, hey, what is there about the way I talk that puts you to sleep? I mean, you could follow that up with, what is there about the way I talk that makes you mad? What is there about the way I talk that provokes your interest? But let's just leave it simple. Find someone, I don't know, maybe your mom, because moms give us a benefit of the doubt, but sometimes they can give us straight from the shoulder suggestions. Say, Mom, do I use enough tone inflection? Do I use the range of, I don't know, but tone inflection and volume and all of these things are the juice. They're the music. They add interest to almost anything that you have to say. Maybe that's the reason that anything said in a foreign language is interesting, because other languages teach us different tone inflections, right? And the Romantic languages, French and Spanish, and help me with the others, man, they are very lilting. They're musical. And Mandarin, man, it's a sing-song, right? And it's just so compelling. And there are guttural languages, that just lack that. But at least for English speakers, there's a wide range of ways to use your voice miles beyond simply articulating the sounds. Now, speaking of tone inflection and vocabulary and who you're speaking to, none of us would speak to a room of 6th graders the way we would speak to a room of 6-year-olds, or the way we would speak to a room of, I don't know, fill in the blank. Programmers or doctors or politicians. So you got to know your audience. Now, of course, that's intuitive, except we've all met people who only have one gear and one vocabulary, and anything over 3 syllables they never mess with. And on the other hand, there are the people who never say anything in less than, 2 or 3 paragraphs, regardless of the fact that 5 or 6 words would have done it. There's a self-awareness. There's a situational awareness and a self-awareness that has to come if you're going to become an effective and compelling communicator. And one of them is know your audience and then have the mental agility to speak to that audience. So for example, if you're a new contractor, and I don't know, maybe you're 15 years out of high school, and the high school locker room conversations are still in your mind. You haven't expunged those yet, or I don't know. Maybe whatever it is that you've read or watched or listened to is imprinted deeply. Well, you need to recognize that when you're talking to a client, a prospective client, particularly if you're not a bottom-feeding contractor, nothing wrong with that. The people who don't have much money still need to get work done. But maybe you're breaking into a market where the people are a little further up the economic ladder than you are. You've got to figure out a way to speak to them in their language. That's why I've got books on this table, because here's where you can go to do that. And podcasts. You can listen to podcasts that are conversations between highly educated people. And you hang on every word, not because you believe everything they're saying and can apply it to your life, although maybe you can, but because they are teaching you ways to communicate that will elevate the society where your communication will be welcome and respected. So think about that. You got to be able to shift gears in your conversation. So the next item was pretty much introduced by what I just said, and it's reading. Reading has been so important to me. And now we're in the 21st century with the encyclopedia of all knowledge in our pockets and podcasts and all of that. And so is reading obviated? No, it can't be. It cannot be pushed aside because it's in books, the best books, that people of intellect and often goodwill have ordered their thoughts as carefully as they can. Books don't, particularly the good books, don't just spring into existence willy-nilly. They emerge painstakingly and over time. And so what you're reading, when a good author is writing and you're absorbing it, is their best use of language. If you would have listened to them talk, you would have been hearing a more spontaneous representation of their writing, right? Now their words are distilled and filtered and purified and made public, but their speaking would be so familiar. So if you read really good books with the intention of recognizing how that author thought and how they spoke, it will unavoidably, it's the tide that lifts all the boats, okay? It will enable you. It'll compel you, actually. You will find yourself using the phrases and the metaphors and you'll find yourself using their wisdom. And not just in your speech, but in your actions. And that is why great books produce great people. So if you want to be a great communicator, you got to read some great books. So I can't give you my top 3 authors, and it would be meaningless for me to try to give you my top 3 books, except I can tell you this. As a young carpenter who closed the door on higher education foolishly, but had a family to support and work to do and couldn't miss a day, and I needed education, the books that were formal discourse, the books that were hard, where I had to go back and read it more than once, where sometimes I had to have a dictionary, compared to the novels. I mean, Louis L'Amour and Jim Kelgard and all the rest, why was I going to say Mark Twain? Yes, Mark Twain, Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn. I loved all those. But the ones that conveyed to me a better way of thinking and speaking and being were the books that were written in formal discourse for serious reasons. Biographies, philosophy, Christian apologetics, C.S. Lewis, Hugh Nibley, Orson Scott Card. His novels elevated my thinking. But there are any number of great books. And there's practically no difference. There's no practical difference between the man who cannot read and the man who will not read. So if you are one of the vanishingly small percentage of humanity over time, such a tiny percentage of us have learned to read. I mean, you compare the mass of humanity to the number of people that have become literate. If you're one of those, don't waste it. Okay, so here's the second to last. You've almost done it. You've almost done it. And that is what could just be considered an affectation, okay? A costume. What we put on our bodies is a costume, isn't it? Now, at Halloween, it's overtly a costume. And we put on something, little kids put on something, or if we go to costume parties, we put on something that is designed to make people think we are a particular thing, a particular person, what a costume does. Well, guess what? Everything we put on our bodies, every mark we put on it, every bit of eyeliner, the way we cut our hair, all of it, the style of glasses that we buy, is part of our costume. It's part of our uniform, if you will, that describes in real ways how we want to present ourselves to the world. Really, in many ways, what tribe we belong to. But we don't think of that. It's all kind of unconscious and at a foundational level. And I tell myself, and I think rightly so, that my costume, my work costume, is entirely practical. Well, probably. The double front lager dungarees are entirely practical. The suspenders are mostly practical, but there's a lot of hard-working men who wear belts. And before your rear end falls off when you turn 40, you don't have to wear a belt. But I also wear suspenders because it identifies, can I own that? Part of it is, besides the practicality of keeping my shirt tucked in and my pants pulled up, and besides that, it identifies me as a serious working man. And so, but whatever you wear, pick a costume that is going to label you as a serious person, unless you want to be thought of as a goof-off. Well, then by all means, pick a costume that is going to brand you a goof-off. But nobody likes to communicate for very long with the court jester. So give some thought to putting on your body that which is going to communicate what you want people to start with when you get a chance to have a conversation. Okay, here's the closer. The best communicators draw participation from whoever they're communicating with, and they don't have to fake their interest. So begin to communicate in a way that encourages people to bring what they have to the table, as a way to establish consensus, as a way to understand what's in the other person's heart and mind. Learn to ask, this is a little hard to describe, but ask the second question first. Instead of coming, like somebody said, well, yeah, we just had a weekend over at the coast. The first question is, oh, did you have a good time? But the second question might be, did it give you an opportunity to bond more significantly with those teenagers you've been having trouble with? So you dispense with the first question and come with the second higher value question, and then listen in rapt attention. And if you let silence stretch forward when they've come to the end of their first paragraph, it invites them to follow up. And by the time you've done that once or twice, you have a give and take that's going to enrich both of you. So it's a mistake, it's a capital mistake to approach communication as a means to manipulation. It's a life skill to be able to communicate in a way that will persuade and will invite. You're leaving money on the table if you don't get out of your own skin enough to be able to use tone inflection. So overcome that. It's part of shyness, right? When somebody's cripplingly shy, they just keep their voice. All of these things I think have value, but here's what really has value, is find a way, starting in your own home, to have communication that enriches, that lifts, that invites, that encourages, that strengthens consensus and makes your family bulletproof. And then enlarge the circle. Find ways to have communication with the people in the next circle of your life that does the same thing. And then push that out just as far as you can. And you'll do some good. And you will die a happier man. Thanks for watching Essential Craftsman. And keep up the good work.